He missed his one shot at a new life to change a stranger's flat tire. Little did he know, the old man he helped was a billionaire holding the keys to his destiny. His future was riding on a 9 a.m. interview. For the son of a maid, the Finch Legacy Scholarship wasn't just about the money. It was about breathing room. It was an escape. But a sudden storm had him running, his one good suit getting soaked in the cold, biting rain. He was halfway there when he saw him, an old man, alone, struggling with a hopelessly flat tire. His gut screamed at him to keep going. This was his one chance. But he stopped. As he knelt in the street grit, watching his opportunity wash away, he was totally unaware of one thing. The old man he was helping was a billionaire and the one man who could decide his future. Now, where in the world are you tuning in from? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoy the story. The 6:30 a.m. city bus always smelled like wet wool and exhaust fumes. David Okoro sat perfectly straight, his back a careful inch from the cracked vinyl seat. He refused to let the city's grime get on him today. Today was different. His suit was charcoal gray. It wasn't new. His mother, Bola, had found it at a Goodwill 2 weeks ago. It had a faint stain on the cuff she'd worked on for an hour last night, scrubbing it until it was nearly invisible. She had ironed it twice, making the creases razor sharp. David, at 18, looked older in the suit. His short hair was neatly brushed, making his jawline look sharp. It made him look serious. He hoped it made him look worthy. In his pocket, his fingers traced the familiar shape of a worn wooden bead bracelet. It had belonged to his grandfather in Nigeria. It was a simple thing, but it was his anchor in the swirling sea of his nerves. His grandfather always used to say, "One hand cannot lift a heavy load alone." It was a reminder to always help and to accept help. The bus rattled over the bridge, leaving his neighborhood behind. A place of cracked pavement, corner stores with bars on the windows, and the constant sound of sirens. It was home, but David wanted more. His mother, Bola, cleaned the massive, empty houses in the rich part of town. She left before the sun came up and came home long after it set, her hands always smelling like lemons and bleach. "You are bigger than this place, David," she told him last night, her voice thick with her Nigerian accent and exhaustion. "You show them their Okoro spirit, you go earn what is yours." The interview. It was the Finch Legacy Scholarship, a full ride to the state university. It was simply everything. The sky cracked open. A sudden violent downpour hammered the bus. David's heart jumped when he saw his connecting bus pull away from the stop, too full to take anyone else. The next one wasn't for 20 minutes. His time cushion was gone. No, he whispered. He couldn't be late. He checked his phone. The university was 20 blocks away. He could make it if he ran. He pulled his thin coat tight and plunged into the storm. The rain hit him like a wall. He clutched his portfolio, containing his whole future, and ran. He was halfway there, soaked but on track, when he saw the car. It was a big black sedan, looking very out of place, with one tire completely shredded. And next to it, an old white man was kicking the flat tire, shouting something the wind stole away. David's mind screamed at him to keep running, that this wasn't his problem, but his grandfather's words echoed in his head, and his feet slowed to a stop.
He stood there, frozen, the rain dripping from his nose. He looked at the old man who now leaned against the expensive car, looking utterly defeated. David felt the worn wooden beads in his pocket. One hand cannot lift a heavy load alone. "Forget it," he whispered into the storm. He crossed the small river running along the curb. "Sir?" he called out, his voice barely carrying over the wind. "Sir, you need a hand?" The old man looked up, startled to see a young man soaked to the bone and clutching a portfolio. "Son, you ought to be indoors," he yelled back. "I can't get this darn jack to stay put. The ground's too slick." "You gotta brace it," David said, moving closer. He knew this. His uncle ran a small auto shop and David had spent a summer there, learning the hard way. He dropped his backpack by the car and placed his portfolio carefully on the back seat, hoping the leather would keep it dry. "Let me try," he said. He knelt on the gritty, wet pavement. The cold immediately soaked through the knees of his suit pants, but he didn't care anymore. "The jack has to be on the frame, not the car's body," he said, his voice suddenly confident. He shifted the jack, finding the solid steel. "Okay, stand back, sir." The old man watched, stunned as David began cranking the jack with a steady, practiced rhythm. "Where'd you learn to do that?" he asked. "My neighborhood," David said, not looking up. "You learn to fix things, or you don't go anywhere." The car slowly lifted. The rain hammered his back, and his hands were getting stiff from the cold, but he worked fast, loosening the lug nuts. They were on tight. He put his whole weight into it, grunting. "This is crazy," the old man said, now holding a small, useless umbrella over him. "You're ruining your clothes." "They're just clothes," David said, though it felt like a lie. This suit was his armor, and it was being destroyed. He pulled the shredded tire off and grabbed the small spare from the trunk. "You got an interview, don't you?" the old man asked, having noticed the portfolio. "Yes, sir." David was trying not to let his voice break. His hands were now black with grease. "What time?" 9 o'clock. The old man glanced at his simple, elegant gold watch. His eyes widened. "My heavens, son, it's 8:45. David's stomach plummeted. 8:45? He'd been here for 20 minutes. It was impossible. He would never make it. It was over. He just stopped moving, the spare tire halfway on. All he could hear was the pounding in his chest. All that work, his mother's hopes, gone. I'm late," he whispered. The old man's face softened, the frustration gone, replaced by a deep, sudden understanding. "Finish the tires, son." "What?" "Finish the tires, son. We're not done here."
David stared at him, but something in the man's firm voice cut through his panic. He nodded, a single grim jerk of his head. He lifted the spare tire, locked it in place, and tightened the lug nuts with a new, furious energy. He finished the job. He lowered the jack. He stood up. He was a wreck. His hair was plastered to his head, his face was streaked with dirt, and his hands were black. His suit, his one good suit, was completely ruined. The old man looked at him, his expression unreadable for a moment. "What's your name?" he asked. "David Okoro." "Well, David Okoro," he said, opening the driver's side door. "Get in. I'll give you a ride." "Sir, I can't. I'm a mess. I'll ruin your car." "I've seen worse," the man said with the first hint of a smile. "I made you late. It's the least I can do. Get in." David hesitated, then slid into the passenger seat. The leather was smooth and smelled like rich leather and wood. He sat on the very edge, dripping onto the floor mat. The old man got in and pulled smoothly into traffic. "Where to at the university?" he asked. "Founders Hall," David said, his voice small. The old man nodded. "You know," he said, glancing at David, "you stopped. No one else did. You knew you were ruining your clothes, you knew you'd be late, but you stopped anyway." David just looked down at his ruined hands. "My grandfather," he said quietly. "He always said one hand can't lift a heavy load alone." The old man was silent for a long time. They pulled up to the massive, ivy-covered building. It was 9:04 a.m. "Thank you, sir," David said, grabbing his portfolio and running. He sprinted up the marble steps, his wet shoes squeaking, and pushed open the heavy oak doors. The lobby was silent and smelled like money and lemon polish. A white woman sat at a huge desk. She wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, her blonde hair in a flawless bun. Her eyes traveled from David's soaked hair down his grease-stained suit to the puddle forming at his feet. Her expression was pure, icy disgust. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice as cold as the rain. I'm here for the Finch Scholarship. I'm David Okoro. My interview was for 9 a.m. The woman, whose nameplate read Miss Albright, Foundation Administrator, looked at the huge clock on the wall. It is 9:05 a.m., Mr. Okoro. The 9 a.m. slot is over. I'm afraid you have missed your opportunity. David did the right thing, but the gatekeeper to his future just slammed the door in his face. Is this the end of the road for him? Find out in the next part what happens when Miss Albright learns who David was really helping. If you're rooting for David, hit that like button and subscribe to Black Fables.
Please, David begged, his voice cracking. I'm here now. The storm, the bus. There was a man with a flat tire, and I stopped to help him. Miss Albright held up a single, pale hand, stopping him cold. The Finch Foundation values two things above all, Mr. Okoro: excellence and punctuality. Punctuality is a sign of respect. It is the most basic requirement of our scholarship recipients. The finality in her voice hit David like a physical blow. Missed his opportunity. But I did the right thing, David whispered, more to himself than to her. Miss Albright offered a thin, tight smile. That may be, but the right thing did not get you to your interview on time. We have a very long list of qualified candidates who did. A door opened down the hall, and a young white man in a perfect suit walked out, smiling. I'm afraid you'll have to leave, Miss Albright said, already looking back down at her computer. You are dripping on the floor. David stood there for one more second, frozen in humiliation. He could feel the stares of other students waiting. He turned, his wet shoes squeaking in defeat, and walked back out the heavy doors, back into the rain. He stood on the marble steps, numb. The cold from his wet clothes had seeped into his bones, but it was nothing compared to the chill in his heart. He had failed. He had failed his mother. He had failed himself. He pulled the wooden bead bracelet from his pocket. A lot of good that did me, Grandpa, he whispered to the empty air. He forced his legs to move, walking down the steps, each one heavier than the last. He huddled under a bus shelter, shivering uncontrollably. When the bus finally came, it was warm inside. He found a seat in the back and stared out the window, watching the beautiful campus slide by. He had dreamed of walking these paths. Now he was just watching his dream disappear. The bus crossed the bridge back to his world. The shame was a heavy weight on his chest. How could he face his mother? She had woken up at 4:30 a.m. to make him breakfast. She'd probably skipped her own meal to make sure he had enough. She had spent 12 months that should have gone to the light bill. He got off the bus 3 blocks from their apartment. He walked up the 3 flights of stairs, the elevator having been broken for a year. He stood outside apartment 3B and could hear the faint sound of the news on their small TV. He raised his hand to knock, then stopped. He couldn't do it. He slid down the wall and sat on the floor, right outside his own door. He pulled his knees to his chest and finally, silently, let himself cry. He let his one chance slip away for a stranger. Now, sitting outside his own home, he feels like he's lost everything. But what he doesn't know is that his story is far from over. Stick with us on Black Fables to see how this one act of kindness will come back in the most unexpected way.
He wasn't sure how long he sat there, but eventually the door to 3B opened. His mother, Bola Jensen, stood there. She was still in her gray work uniform. Her shift didn't start until noon. She looked at her son, at the wet hair, the ruined suit, the grease-stained hands, and the tears. Bola didn't ask what happened. She just stepped into the hallway, knelt on the dirty carpet she had scrubbed 100 times, and wrapped her arms around her son. "Oh, my boy," she whispered, her voice full of a pain that matched his own. "You are freezing." She pulled David to his feet and brought him inside. The apartment was tiny, but it was spotless. "Go," she said, her voice firm now. "A hot shower, right now." 20 minutes later, David came out of the bathroom wrapped in an old bathrobe. The dread was still a cold stone in his stomach. His mother was in the small kitchen with a steaming cup of tea waiting for him. "Okay," she said, sitting across from him. "Tell me." So he told her everything. The bus, the rain, the old man, the flat tire. "He drove me there, Mom," David said quietly. "But I was 4 minutes late. The woman, Miss Albright, she wouldn't even let me in. She said I was dripping on the floor." Bola stared at her own hands, her knuckles red and chapped from years of cleaning chemicals. "I ruined the suit, Mom," David whispered, the final confession. "I'm so sorry." For a long time, the only sound was the drip of the kitchen faucet. Finally, Bolan looked up. Her eyes weren't angry. They were filled with something else, something David couldn't quite read. "You stopped." "What?" "You were late. Your whole future was on the line, and you saw an old man, a stranger, in trouble, and you stopped." "Yeah, and I missed my chance. I missed everything." "No, David," Bola said, leaning forward and taking his hand. "You did not miss everything. The scholarship, yes, that would have made things easier, but that is just money. It is not your character. Your grandfather, he didn't become a respected elder in our village because he was always on time. He became respected because when the floods came, he was the first one out in the water pulling his neighbors to safety. He did what was right, not what was easy." She squeezed David's hand. "You have that same spirit. You saw someone in trouble and you did not walk away. I have never, ever been more proud of you than I am in this moment."
Just then, a firm knock echoed from the apartment door. David and Bola exchanged a confused look. David opened it, his heart stopping, when he saw the old man from the rain standing in their dim hallway. He was clean now, his white hair perfectly combed, wearing the same expensive wool coat, now dry. "Sir?" David stammered. "May I come in?" the old man asked, his eyes kind but serious. He stepped inside, the tiny living room seeming to shrink around him. "My name is Robert Finch." Bola gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She knew that name. Every maid in the city knew that name. "You," she whispered, "the Finch Scholarship." "Yes," Mr. Finch said gently. "It was started in my father's memory. I'm afraid I am the man who founded it." He looked at David. "I called my foundation administrator, Ms. Albright. I explained that the real interview wasn't in her office. The real test was on a wet, miserable street corner, and you, young man, passed with flying colors. Ms. Albright has been asked to take a very long vacation to reconsider what our foundation truly stands for." He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick white envelope. "The scholarship is yours, David. Full tuition, room and board, books, and a living stipend for all 4 years." David couldn't speak. He just took the envelope as tears streamed down his face. Bola was sobbing quietly, holding on to her son. "But that's not all," Mr. Finch said, turning to her. "Bola, my head of household is retiring. I need someone with integrity and an eye for detail to replace her. The position is yours if you want it. The pay is substantially more, and it comes with a house on the estate." 3 months later, David walked across the sunny university campus, no longer an outsider, but a scholar. He was on his way home, not to a cramped apartment, but to a small, clean cottage with flowers in the window boxes. He walked in, the house smelling of his mother's jollof rice. Bola was in the kitchen, not in a maid's uniform, but in a crisp blouse, looking 10 years younger, looking like a boss. She smiled, the deep wary lines around her eyes finally gone. They sat down to eat at a solid oak table. As David picked up his fork, his fingers brushed against the worn wooden bracelet on his wrist.
He had stopped for a stranger, and in doing so, had lifted the weight of the world off his family's shoulders. He hadn't missed his future that day. He had driven right toward it. And that's where David's new life begins. A single choice, a moment of character when everything was on the line, changed his entire world. We hope this story from Black Fables was a reminder that the best parts of us are revealed when things are at their worst. What did you think of David's decision? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more stories that inspire, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks for being here with us.